Hey, welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take this stack of source materials you've given us, the articles, reports, notes, and really just pull out the key stuff, the important insights, maybe some surprising facts that help you make sense of it all.
Yeah, think of us as your shortcut through all that information. We're aiming to give you that well-informed perspective without you having to read every single page. We'll highlight what really jumped out at us.
And today's pile is, well, it's pretty fascinating. It covers such a wide range. We've got things like cutting-edge autonomous vehicles, cybersecurity breaches.
And then all the way over to the tricky dance of international trade, plus big shifts in domestic policy, clean energy funding, things like that.
Exactly. It might seem like a jumble of different topics at first glance.
Right. But as we get into it, you'll start to see how these things actually connect, how they
Yeah.
influence each other in maybe unexpected ways. We're looking for those aha moments.
Totally. Okay, so let's dive right in. This first section from the sources. It takes us straight into that intersection of advanced tech and Washington, D.C. power. We're talking Elon Musk, Tesla, and this big push for autonomous vehicles.
That's definitely a major theme here. The documents show Musk is really actively involved in lobbying lawmakers, specifically on laws that are critical for self-driving cars.
And it's not just like sending the usual lobbyists.
Yeah.
The reports say Musk himself and people close to him are actually making direct calls to members of Congress.
Yeah, direct engagement. And they seem to be focusing on one bill in particular, the Autonomous Vehicle Acceleration Act. It was just introduced pretty recently, May 15th.
So why is this bill so important for them?
Well, the sources make it pretty clear. Tesla's whole future strategy seems heavily bet on AI, robotics, and getting autonomous vehicles commercialized. You see the company's valuation tied to that promise all the time.
And they have actual plans mentioned in these documents, like a small robotaxi service, supposedly launching next month in Austin, Texas.
Right, but that one's geofenced, limited to a specific area. The bigger picture, though, includes these cybercabs. Vehicles with, no steering wheels or pedals at all.
Okay, but here's the roadblock, right?
Yeah.
Which the sources detail.
Exactly. There's just a lack of clear federal rules or standards right now. Nothing that really allows these types of vehicles, especially the ones without traditional controls, to operate, legally and safely across the whole country at scale.
So
Yeah.
clearing that regulatory hurdle, that's the goal of this lobbying push.
Precisely. It's about shaping the rules for the technology they want to deploy.
And speaking of navigating or maybe sometimes clashing with legal and government systems, the sources also get into another interesting situation involving Musk and his platform X.
Yes. This takes us to Texas. It's about Attorney General Ken Paxton's investigation into Media Matters for America, MMFA. The latest, according to these sources, is that Paxton lost an appeal. He was trying to force MMFA to hand over a bunch of documents.
And the court's reasoning for blocking Paxton's probe is pretty stark, isn't it?
It is. Senior Circuit Judge Harry T. Edwards apparently found ample evidence, his words, that Paxton was engaged in a retaliatory campaign against MMFA.
Retaliatory because
Because MMFA published an article critical of X.com, the judge really leaned on the First Amendment here, saying, government officials generally can't retaliate against people or groups for protected speech.
the timing mentioned in the sources is also, well, it's notable. Paxton announced his investigation the day after X sued MMFA.
Right. And the judge pointed out that Paxton's own press release basically confirmed it was a direct response to X's lawsuit.
What did the press release say?
It called MMFA a radical anti-free speech organization and claimed they fraudulently manipulated data on X.com. Strong words.
But the judge's take on that claim.
Pretty blunt. Called Paxton's argument meritless and utterly devoid of evidence.
And the sources remind us that Musk himself had previously said it would be interesting if state AGs joined his, quote, thermonuclear fight against critics.
Yeah, that context is included. Paxton was trying to get a lot of information from MMFA documents, communications, going way back to early 2022.
The idea being, presumably, to find something, bias, collusion, whatever, to help X's case against them.
That seems to be the implication reported. And importantly, the sources note that just the threat of this investigation had real consequences for MMFA.
How so?
Evidence was presented showing their reporting on X was chilled. Some research partners actually backed away because of the whole legal situation.
And the judge seemed to think Paxton was ignoring established law on free speech protections.
Yes, suggesting it was arguably a bad faith probe. The judge even noted some irony, pointing to other cases where Paxton argued against silencing companies.
So the MFFA president called it a victory for free speech, seeing it as Musk trying to shut down a critic. It's definitely a case study from these documents on how corporate fights and government power can intersect around criticism.
It certainly highlights those ongoing tensions, yeah, between free speech, corporate power, and government action in this digital media landscape.
Okay, shifting gears now from tech giants and lawsuits. Let's look at another big area in the sources where government policy is making waves, U.S.-China trade. It looks like that recent truce might be getting a bit shaky.
Yeah, there was that agreement reached around May 12th, remember? After some earlier tariff fights. It was supposed to cool things down.
And the core of it, according to these documents, was pretty significant, right? Both sides agreeing to cut import tariffs by 115% for 90 days.
Which broke down like this. China was to cut tariffs on U.S. goods from 125% way down to 10%. The U.S. would cut levies on Chinese goods from 145% down to 30%.
But there was still that separate tariff on small shipments, the de minimis ones.
Right. Those imports under $800 still faced a 54% levy coming into the U.S., so even stuff bought directly online wasn't getting a full pass.
But now the sources are pointing to several U.S. actions that suggest this détente.
Mhm.
Maybe it's falling apart.
Seems that way. For instance, there are new restrictions on U.S. companies selling certain chip design software to Chinese firms. That hits a key tech area.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is reportedly talking about revoking visas for some Chinese students, especially those linked to the CCP.
Plus, the Commerce Department suspended export licenses. This affects U.S. companies supplying engine parts and tech to Comac, China's state-owned aircraft maker. Hitting their aerospace ambitions is a big move.
There's also talk, the sources say, of blacklisting more subsidiaries of Chinese companies that are already on that restricted entities list.
And even President Trump, according to a Truth Social post mentioned here, jumped in saying China totally violated its agreement.
So what's reportedly driving this new tension? The Wall Street Journal piece cited points to one thing specifically.
Yeah, China's intransigence on rare earth metals. That seems to be the sticking point.
Apparently, during those talks in Geneva, the U.S. really pushed for China to quickly resume exporting rare earths to the U.S., but Beijing's been slow-walking the export licenses.
That's the report, using delaying tactics. And this isn't minor stuff.
No, the sources describe the situation as potentially dire, saying some U.S. auto plants might have to cut production or even stop entirely.
Because rare earth metals are crucial, right? Especially for magnets and electric motors, but also lots of other tech. And the problem, as the sources note, is the U.S. can't just flip a switch and produce its own. It takes like a decade to build that domestic capacity.
It really underlines a major vulnerability, shows how a specific trade issue can ripple out and hit huge industries.
Absolutely. And sticking with government policy shifts impacting domestic stuff, the sources also detail the Trump administration deciding to potentially claw back clean energy and manufacturing awards.
We're talking a lot of money here, about $3.7 billion in awards originally made under the previous administration.
Yeah, the Department of Energy made the announcement.
And the reason given by Energy Secretary Chris Wright, according to the sources, it was just due diligence. He mentioned a memo suggesting they might use audit powers to, well, reevaluate these things.
And it affects a fair number of projects, 24 in total. It's a mix, too. Big companies like ExxonMobil, Kraft Heinz, but also smaller, growing startups. Skyvin, Brimstone, Sublime Systems are mentioned.
Looking through the list here.
Yeah.
Yeah. American Cast Iron Pipe, $75 million. Brimstone, $189 million. ExxonMobil, over $330 million. Skyvin, $15 million. Sublime, nearly $87 million. All those awards are now sort of up in the air.
And these were for projects focused on things like decarbonizing industry, producing critical materials domestically, that sort of thing.
So how are the companies reacting?
Well, the sources show a couple of examples. Sublime said they were surprised and disappointed, and they're figuring out their next steps.
Okay.
Brimstone, though, sounded maybe a bit more hopeful. They think it might be a misunderstanding. They specifically pointed out how their project actually aligns with priorities the administration has talked about, like critical minerals, producing alumina here in the U.S., creating jobs.
So it creates a lot of uncertainty, clearly. Even if it's framed as due diligence, these policy shifts have real impacts on projects already in the works.
Definitely shows how changes at the top can ripple down very quickly.
Okay, now for something.
Yeah.
Well, completely different, but just as detailed in these source materials. This is an insider threat case study from the government security world. And it's quite a story.
Yeah, this involves an individual named Nathan Lach, 28 years old, worked in cybersecurity at the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA.
His position is key here. He wasn't just any employee. He worked in the Insider Threat Division. He had top-secret clearance, access to special access programs, basically some of the government's deepest secrets.
And his job. He literally spent his days enabling user monitoring on people with access to DIA systems, including people already under investigation. So, as the source puts it, he was watching the watchers.
Which seems to have led to a certain confidence. The source uses the word hubris. He apparently thought he was too good to get caught. Called other people's security mistakes stupid mistakes he wouldn't make. Even thought DIA couldn't investigate him without him finding out.
So why did he allegedly do what he did? His stated motivation, according to the sources, was being disgruntled. He felt the recent actions of the current administration were extremely disturbing and didn't align with the values the U.S. at one time stood for.
Okay, so the alleged plot kicks off in March 2025. He sends an anonymous email to a friendly foreign government offering classified information.
Right, anonymous. But here's where that feeling of being untouchable just collapses. According to the sources, there were several, well, stupid mistakes that let the FBI identify him very quickly once they got hold of that email.
Okay, let's break down these mistakes. Number one.
A redaction fail. The anonymous email had photos of a U.S. government ID. He blacked out his name and photo, sure, but on one ID, other information wasn't blacked out, and that unredacted info was enough for law enforcement to figure out the ID belonged to him.
Wow. Okay, mistake two.
An email address fail. The anonymous email account he set up, it received a message, possibly a test message the day it was created, from a second email account. And that second account turned out to be one of Latch's, and it actually contained his name.
Oh boy. Mistake three.
An email account fail. That second email account, the one with his name, it was set up using his full name, date of birth, and phone number.
Seriously. Okay, there must be more.
Yep. Number four, an IP address fail. Both email accounts, the anonymous one and the one with all his personal details, were logged into from the same IP address, and that IP address traced directly back to his house.
So much for being hard to catch. He apparently suggested moving to an encrypted messaging app later.
He did, but the damage was obviously done. The trail was clear as day by then.
So the FBI gets involved.
Immediately. They started a sting operation, pretending to be the foreign country he contacted. They asked him to do a dead drop leave data in a park in Virginia.
Now, how did he allegedly get classified data out of the DIA, given his role? This part is wild.
It really is. The sources say he went into work and used his knowledge of their tracking systems to try and avoid detection. How? Not by copying files electronically. No. He allegedly copied secret documents by hand into notebooks, then ripped out the pages and stuffed them in his socks to carry them out.
He copied them by hand to avoid digital tracking.
That's the report. But here's the kicker. While he was trying to bypass the digital monitoring, the source explicitly says this whole hand copying process was caught on DIA video monitoring.
Oh, the irony. He missed the cameras.
Seems like it. So he allegedly typed up his handwritten notes, put them on a thumb drive, and left it at that park in Alexandria on May 1st, 2025. The FBI picked it up.
And did they learn more about his motivation?
Yeah, in communications around May 8th, he allegedly said he wasn't after money. He wanted citizenship for your country, said he didn't expect things here to improve in the long term.
And then he was arrested when?
May 29th, 2025. Just an incredible story from these sources. Deep access, political motivation, overconfidence, and then just fundamental operational security errors. It really drives home that technical skill in one specific area, like cybersecurity monitoring, doesn't automatically translate to good overall security practice, especially not when hubris gets involved.
So when we step back and look at everything we covered in this dive, it's quite a spectrum, isn't it? We went from the complexities of Tesla lobbying for futuristic tech regulations,
right into these intense legal fights over corporate criticism, free speech, involving figures like Ken Paxton and platforms like X.
Then we jump to the global stage. The U.S.-China trade tensions, the potential impact of things like rare earth metal disputes on huge industries.
And back to domestic policy, with billions in clean energy funding suddenly put into question by a shift in administration priorities.
And capped it off with that just unbelievable insider threat story. Deep secrets, high confidence, and basic mistakes.
What really comes through from weaving together these different threads from the source materials is that constant, almost chaotic interaction. You see technology racing ahead, policy scrambling to react or control, big economic forces shaping decisions.
And then just human elements thrown in.
Yeah.
Motivations, misjudgments, sometimes just simple errors influencing everything.
Yeah, they might seem like separate stories, but they all reveal parts of this larger picture.
So maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on, pulling together these different insights. When you see these snapshots, tech lobbying, free speech battles, trade wars, funding shifts, security failures, what does it tell you about the sheer challenge of maintaining control and transparency, especially in a world where information flies instantly? But our systems, our rules, our regulations, they often seem to be struggling just to keep pace.